Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sai here today to discuss with you further about our Stuart's Britain topic. And in this one, we're going to take our studies on Charles's personal rule further by now considering the situation in Scotland and Ireland from 1629 to 1638. If you haven't already, do make sure you checked out our previous videos on this topic as we explore the situation in England during this time. But now we want to expand that and explore the geography at large in the wider kingdom. With all that said, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. So yes, as we said, we already looked at England in our previous video, the part one of this topic, but now in the same span of time, we have to understand if this personal rule was really negatively impacting society in the wider kingdom. We already have some clear opposition and dissent occurring in England and principally among the gentry class and the Puritans. What about Scotland? What about Ireland? Were they actually more supportive of this? And have we got a clear division occurring between the three kingdoms and how they view Charles's rule? Well, let's move forward and see if that's the case. So, in our studies on the situation in Scotland and Ireland, there's several things we have to consider. For instance, we have to really learn a lot more about Thomas Wentworth. We already touched upon him slightly in our previous video, but as we established, his domain was in the north of England and being sent to Ireland. So, we need to understand what exactly Wentworth did while he was in Ireland and what was so significant about how he shaped people's perception of personal rule during these events in the wider kingdom. We also need to understand what's happened to Scotland in this time as well. After all, Scotland is where Charles has come from. That's where the monarchy that he's following under James has originated. So how exactly are they interpreting personal rule? Do they like what their king has done, or do they actually think he's going too far? And as always, religion is an important theme throughout this topic, so you need to consider how important religion is in explaining the events that happened during Charles' personal rule. And again, as we're going to recall, how the religions in Scotland and Ireland may be interpreting things differently to how England has already been shown to do. And then once that's understood, we can then combine it with our knowledge about the issues in England in our previous video and use that to inform decision of if Charles had become tyrannical without Parliament there to influence him. So first off, let's just recap quickly the religious differences between the three kingdoms. If you haven't already, do make sure, as I've said, go back and watch this video to really get a greater grasp on not just the differences, but also the key religions that were in these areas at this time. But as a short summary of what we can certainly draw upon, we should understand that Charles allowed William Laud to promote Arminianism in England, which had angered many Puritans, part of the Anglican Church. In Scotland, it's the Presbyterians who control the kirk, they're equivalent to the Anglican Church, and they're deeply influenced by Calvinism. But they're also therefore irritated that Charles is not as interested in them as his father James I had been. As for Ireland, they hold a numerical majority of Catholics, but Calvinism dominates the Irish Anglican Church in Ulster from the gentry have settled at this time. So already there's some clear differences of Presbyterians in Scotland and Catholics in Ireland. Are they going to different reactions to the policies that Charles has been promoting? Let's find out. So let's consider Thomas Wentworth. We need to know a fair bit more about him to understand what he's going to do in his actions in Ireland at this time. Now, Wentworth was already an influential MP who actually had been critical of Charles and Buckingham's foreign policy back in the 1620s. However, once Buckingham was assassinated in 1628, he then, of course, joined the king's Privy Council and, of course, increased his power and influence much further. He therefore decided to ally with William Laud, who shared his belief in the ideas of a thorough government. As we said previously, this is where the oversight of the king is much stronger, and they force people to fall into line, unity through uniformity. By 1632, Charles decided to make him Lord Deputy of Ireland and sent him away to monitor that part of the kingdom. However, the reasons for this are not because Charles wanted him to actually oversee Ireland. It's really because he didn't want Wentworth anywhere near him. Charles privately did not like Wentworth and so didn't want him in London to be influenced as part of his inner circle and sense and gain more power by being associated with him. So sending him to Ireland was a great way to send him as far away as possible, but still make him appear as though he had lots of power. But the key thing here is that Wentworth did have lots of power. By becoming Lord Deputy of Ireland, he therefore had free rein through the thorough policies and unity through uniformity to do what he wished and saw fit. So Charles set in motion the events that Wentworth would go on to enact while ruling there from 1632. So what did Wentworth do? What were his actions while stationed in Ireland? Well, when he arrived as Lord Deputy, he came with his own army to ally with the Protestant minority. Yes, we established there's a lot of tension between the Arminians, but they all were united against Catholics at this time. So Wentworth came, allied with that Protestant minority by 1634, and to institute his thorough style of government, he stopped their parliament from debating or even electing their own candidates. He instituted this style of government to control Ireland, and he imposed a large amount of fines and taxes upon them to take land and money principally from those who opposed him. Doing this on paper seemed like a brilliant idea. Thanks to what he did, they ended Ireland's £20,000 deficit that had been plaguing the nation for some years. However, to do this, he used his army to forcibly take that money and land from the Irish Catholic majority that were present there. This undoubtedly infuriated the Catholics, and it also actually angered the Puritans because by taking land, he also was attacking their authority in the Anglican Church as well. And by doing so, he also was enforcing these Arminian changes of beauty through holiness and unity through uniformity that we touched upon that was happening in England at the time as well. So, what we can consider here is Wentworth is actually much more oppressive, much more aggressive, and maybe is representing the tyrannical nature that people were fearing Charles was turning into. After all, it was Charles who sent him here. It was Charles who gave him this power as Lord Deputy to do all these things. So, in their eyes, Wentworth symbolizes Charles and tyrannical rule, and therefore justifies their hatred towards that. How about in Scotland? Well, Scotland is undergoing some changes with the Book of Common Prayer. We established already that Charles and Laud wanted to bring in these prayer books, the unity through uniformity throughout all the churches, not just England, but in Ireland and Scotland as well. Presbyterians already disagreed with the sacramental changes, especially the moving of the altar and the reintroduction of the Book of Sports in 1633. However, the turning point was the creation of this new Book of Common Prayer in 1637. This enforced more Arminian leaning changes, as we touched upon previously in England. This is, of course, to focus sermons less about the scripture and more about free flowing homilies. It was also to make things more about a lesson in everyday life rather than focusing on the scripture of Jesus' time. The Presbyterian Scots rioted in protest to these. There's one famous incident where people famously attacked their own priest in their church. And of course, this expanded throughout the villages and into the tribes. And before you know it, Charles was dealing with protests throughout Scotland that he was having to declare as acts of treason. By 1638, the Scots abolished the apostasy of the bishops completely, and therefore, under pressure, Charles was now having to consider if he was actually going to have to go to war with Scotland to force these changes upon him. They were truly at an impasse. The Scots did not want these changes, but Charles could not have his authority as king be so dismissed and oppressively forced back like this by the Scots by all their rioting. It also ran the risk of other nations being inspired as well. If Scotland could force Charles out and force him to concede to their demands, then maybe Ireland and perhaps England itself could also risk successfully rebelling and getting their own way instead. So, by the time we get to 1639, the situation has actually grown in a lot of tension, and a lot of it, as we should know, is coming from these religious differences. All three of the kingdoms had fallen out with Charles for various reasons. Ireland fell out with him because of Wentworth's oppressive actions, alienating the Catholic majority. But the English had fallen out because of Laud's Arminian changes to the Anglican Church, which had really infuriated the gentry and the Puritan classes especially. Charles's own insistence on enforcing this Book of Common Prayer to his own Scots had left Scotland on the brink of war against his very monarchy itself. So The personal rule had actually united England, Scotland, and Ireland, but only on one single issue, and that was that they all now agreed they had grievances with Charles's own monarchy, especially the reforms he was making to their religion. We can't also forget about the financial impact he was having on the land that they owned as well. And they all, of course, now hated his own advisors. Very worried about his wife, a Catholic, Henrietta Maria, but they outright hated Laud and Wentworth, especially for those in Ireland. So let's bring it together. Is this personal rule, or is it actually an 11 years tyranny, as the historiography debates about this? Are there any positives we can look to across this and our previous studies on it? Well, the answer is yes. There actually are some positives. Charles did successfully end war with Spain, and as we established, it also saved him over £400,000 of money as well, reducing the contribution to the war effort to just £70,000. He also, by enforcing the collection of ship money, was collecting £190,000 a year, and this made it the most profitable way to make money. So he's reducing deficits, but also making the monarchy money as well. Wentworth in Ireland had also ended the 20,000 deficit there and was working to improve the wealth, mostly of the Anglican Church, but all the same, the deficit was down. And England was now arguably at peace, and they were financially solvent for the first time in several decades, despite the wider war in Europe. Britain had managed to find itself its own silver lining in all of it. However, to achieve all these things, perhaps tyranny had been what has taken place. There are some negatives to consider as well. For instance, for Laud to get his reforms across, he had formed the Star Chamber, which had been oppressive with its extreme forms of punishment, especially towards the likes of Eliot Hampden and William Prynne, in of course chopping their ears off and imprisoning them for their dissent. Wentworth's own success in reducing the deficit in Ireland was only from subjugating the Irish, especially the Catholics, to his way and forcing them to pay and even evicting them from their own land, creating deep resentment there as well. The Book of Common Prayer's enforcement had also violated the Scottish Church, which led to the Presbyterian majority resisting, rioting, and now left them on the brink of war against Charles and his own monarchy. And of course, in England, in combination with what Laud had done with his Star Chamber, the sheer changes to the religion, the moving the altar, the beauty through holiness, this enforcement of more prayer books and unity through uniformity had only alienated many Protestants, especially the Puritans and the gentry class, in which they were a majority. So, looking at this in wholesale, we can see there are perhaps some cases to make a positive, but there certainly is a lot of negatives to consider as well. As always, I'm not going to tell you the answer. It is on you as a historian to make that decision for yourself. What I would recommend, especially if you're someone studying this for GCSE or A level or any sort of study, perhaps try and split them into themes. It's quite easy just to list the issues that I've done on the screen in a summative manner, but try and consider, can we actually grade them across various themes? Can we split them again into financial grievances, religious concerns, and foreign policy action? Maybe if you do that, you can, of course, find maybe not only an answer to the question, but also understanding how that differs geographically. For instance, is finance the most concerning thing in Ireland, or is it actually religion? Then, of course, you can consider, is religion also the most common grievance in England? Is it the religious changes Laud's bringing across, or is it actually the financial impact that Charles is bringing through ship money and taxing them more? And then, of course, foreign policy. Again, England might prefer the fact that they're no longer at war with Spain and are making peace with the Catholic countries, but then the Irish might consider for their foreign policy, England's only invaded them and is trying to force Protestant rule upon them through Wentworth. So again, there's various things to consider here, and again, it's not a clear-cut decision you can make. You've got to really consider this, split them up across the factors. One thing I will say though is religion is certainly the most common theme. It's impacted all three nations, and therefore in the three kingdoms is perhaps a grievance they all share as we established, and maybe that is the origin for why many now want to consider this the time of tyranny rather than just of personal rule. So I hope you found this video useful. I hope you found it insightful and have expanded your studies on Charles and his own personal rule much further. As always, this is just an introductory topic to it. There's always more reading in the description boxes below for you to delve into and expand your knowledge further. Eagle-eyed viewers among you would have noted I've said a lot of this is only up to 1638, but it's an 11-year tyranny. And that's because we're still missing the third and final piece of this, which is the descent into something called the Bishop's War and a failure to compromise between the three nations and Charles's actions. But we'll save that for our next video. We conclude the topic on our personal rule. What's been your most interesting part we've learned so far? Do make sure you let me know in the comments below and subscribe if you haven't already to make sure you get the next video in our lessons so you can still keep up with our learning. Again, do check out the description box for more reading and feel free to comment any questions or queries you may have for me as well. I hope your comments and helping you out in your studies. Thank you as always for watching. This has been History with Sire, and thank you for listening.